All right, everyone. We might get a start. Today we've got Richard Choi, who's the CEO of NetSpec, and I'll leave Richard to introduce NetSpec, the organization, for you. But Richard very kindly comes down to give us a lecture in this unit once a year, so he's always got valuable things to say. And from my point of view, he's always got what he says can always be turned into exam questions. So that's also good. I'll hand over to Richard. Thanks, Richard.
Okay, thanks. Good afternoon, everyone. Now, if I stand here, you can't see me over there. If I stand here, I'm blocking the view. So my voice is loud enough to pick it up from there. Okay, you can see all that okay? Okay, who wants to be an architect? Why? Because it makes a difference. Because whatever you design will impact on people and on society. It does. So, who's ever walked past a building that has made you feel good? You didn't even have to know what the building was for. But the form of the building and its surroundings makes a difference. And that's what we want from architects, from practitioners in the industry, so that we want people to feel good. We want to create things that are sustainable. And I won't even get into definitions of sustainability because it gets quite tough. Now, what I'm talking about today is about documentation. Okay? So, as John said, we're a not-for-profit organisation. We were formed back in 1975, before all of you were born, and it was a coming together of industry and government. So the key pillars of industry, architects, engineers, quantity surveyors and builders coming together with government to say, right, we want a common language. When we say something, we want everyone else to understand what we mean. So how many people know someone who doesn't have English as a first language? Most of you should. And how many of you had the instance where they didn't quite understand what you meant? And they're still using English, and you're still using English, but it can be interpreted in different ways. And that's no different than in the construction industry. So you need clarity about definitions, clarity about how to communicate. How many of you have opened up the National Construction Code? You should all put your hand up by now. Aren't you in your masters? I'm not saying you've read it. I'm just saying you've opened it, okay? Or you scrolled into it. It's available free. The National Construction Code is the foundation of building regulation in Australia. You must comply with the National Construction Code unless there is a state variation that is different. So you've got to recognise that if you are working in ACT and you are working in Queensland, there may be some changes to the regulations. Okay, so be aware of that, because many of you will work for either national or global organisations. Right. And then, of course, to make things even more confusing, we have 500 odd local councils with their own planning regulations that can change as well. But the National Construction Code is your main Bible with regard to regulation. So if we have a regulation, then what else do we need? We just build and everything will be done right. Unfortunately, the National Construction Code focuses on occupational health and safety. There's a small section on sustainability, section J, but the objective of the National Construction Code is about safety, about fire, about structural stability, about access when there's fire. So, distances to exits, issues like that. So if I have a building, and at least I know it's not going to fall down, is that good enough? Not always, right? Because Some clients want some quality. Some clients want the walls to be straight, not crooked. Some clients want the doors to have multiple uses and still be upright. Example, a hotel. Right? The door used in a hotel compared to a door used in a house is different. A door used in an education facility is different. So they have different levels of quality. And you as designers will have to make a decision, what quality do I want? So the specification is the document, it's the written word that outlines the quality. So think about the time you've spent doing drawings. Your drawings tend to show what you want and where you want it. It's very hard to put on a drawing all the quality requirements. Suddenly you'll be writing essays on them. So in general, it moves to a separate document. Your schedules, right? So window schedule, door schedule, you've done those by now, good. Okay, they can reside either in the specification, on the drawings, or separate. Okay. So when you think of all the documentation, now including, say, the contract between your client and the builder, all of these things come together. They should not, under any circumstance, be in conflict, because every time there's something in conflict, it opens the door to what's called a variation, and every time there's a variation, there is an additional cost. So the main thing to remember is, in order to have quality, you must have a construction specification. This is important. This is basically what I was saying, that it is about working with the other documents. It is about transferring your design thoughts onto paper. It is about complementing the drawings, not replacing the drawings, or the drawings not replacing the specification. This is the quote from the founder of NatSpec, who was the Australian Institute of Architects gold medalist. It's a simple statement, but it's really, really important. If you don't ask for it, you can't expect to get it. Right? So if you don't ask for the door to be straight, you don't necessarily get it, and if it's not straight enough for you, you will pay for the rectification. So you have to put it into your documentation. Okay? Here's what, if any of you are going to become architects, note you can finish architecture, and unless you're registered, you can't use the term architect. So if you're a registered architect, you will have to go through an examination, and part of that examination is on your documentation abilities. So it's important for you as a professional. How to write specifications, 4 rules from the Institute. Sounds like common sense. It is common sense. It's not hard. It just means think about what you want for your client. Not what do you necessarily want as a fantastic architect, but what does your client want? Right? And why? It's all about cost. Sorry, it really is. Poor documentation, up to 10% increase in cost on a project. In this 2005, it's an old report. In fact, I went back to them, asked them, would they do it again? They said, that one still holds, so we'll just keep it. If you have $12 billion of saving possible, and let's assume 1/3 of it is government spending. So if you can save $4 billion per year of government tax, what could you do with it? Free your health, free your transport, free your education. It's massive. $4 billion a year is a lot of money, right? So the potential is there for the society as a whole, and the potential is obviously there for your clients. So getting your documentation right saves money. Okay, when you became architect, or you're not architect yet, when you will become architect, you'll think back on, what did I study? What were those subjects? Oh, we learned about windows and glazing and, I don't know, heat gain coefficients, or funny stuff like that. But what did you enjoy? You enjoyed drawing. Now, I don't even know if you do drawing nowadays. Maybe it's all BIM. You're doing BIM or you're doing drawings, or you do both? Both. Good on you. Right. Okay. Sorry. Playing around on computers is really not my thing. So drawing board's great. You do the drawing, you enjoy the drawing, right? And unfortunately, if something goes wrong, you go along to court and say, oh, I did these drawings, spent all my life on these drawings, and the court says, well, I'm sorry, the specification takes legal precedence over the drawings. Okay. That's a biggie, because as professionals, we tend to spend more time on the drawings, not on the specification. But in the eyes of the court, the specification takes precedence. Why? John said this. I usually tell the story. In my family, both my sisters and my brother are lawyers. Right? So anyone here know lawyers? Yeah, quite a few. No, you say the word lawyers and they smile. The reason is they're an argumentative lot. They can't agree on anything. So we have dinner and they're just bickering over a word. So, their whole life is about words. So if I put a drawing in front of them, they actually have trouble interpreting that. Whereas if I put a sentence in front of them, they can come up with their own interpretation based on how they feel that day, or, in particular, how they want to interpret it for their client, which is their job. So if they can interpret something differently, it's a good job. So that's the only reason why I can think of the specifications would be in high precedence legally. But as you, being professionals, you need to know that, okay? Really, really important. Use of specifications is not just about court. When you do your specification, you're indicating to everyone along the chain your expectation. So if I'm a quantity surveyor and I'm going to price a wall, I can't price the wall purely on the amount of, let's say, concrete there. Okay, so I can't use a standard, this is my volume of concrete, this is my cost of concrete. They will have to take into consideration the quality of finish that you have asked for. Have you allowed them to form it? Right? So if you're putting up formwork, is that formwork flat? Is the formwork pattern? What are you actually asking for in terms of the quality of finish? Are you asking for it to be straight? If you design an art gallery, you actually want the walls to be quite straight. Because when you've got your light coming on the art gallery wall, you don't want all the undulations coming up as shadows. So in art gallery, you care about the straightness of the wall. Compare it to an industrial shed. By the way, industrial sheds can cost a lot of money. $20 million industrial shed is not unusual, because I used to design them. High-tech industrial sheds, about $20 million each. But do we care about the straightness of the wall in the industrial shed? No. In the industrial shed, we're more concerned about security than straightness. So you pick materials and finishes that can be banged, right? That can survive the hits. So right at the start, when you're trying to work out your pricing, the construction specification is important. For me, that one, on-site working document, is the reason why I like specifications. The reason is it gives me the right to accept or reject what's been put before me. So if I don't like what they've done, I can go to my specification and say, look, hold on, your tolerance is wrong, you'll have to redo it. And that includes pulling down a whole wall, if so be. Right? Now, they may come back with alternative solutions to make it straight, which it's up to you whether you accept that or not. But your construction specification on site is your working document. Lesson to learn. When you're a young architect going on site for the first few times, the builders will know it. They'll go, young new architect, tasty meal, we'll get here. And they'll ask you things. They'll say, oh, what do you want here? And if you make up the answer without knowing exactly what's in your documentation, you are opening up the door to a variation. As simple as it may be, you may think you're right, make sure you are right. The correct answer is, have you read the documentation? Right? So you put the onus back on them to read it, to know what's in it, and to go forward from there. If you're unsure at any time, always allow them, I'll go back and check. Don't make knee-jerk decisions, right? Because it has a variation cost to it. And variation cost is not just about materials, it's about time. They'll say, oh, well, you know, they changed it and then they changed it back. I want another 5 days on my construction schedule. So it's a bit of a trick, especially when you're young and you're going on site. Answer is, have you read your documentation? Okay. Do we need specifications? Well, when I joined NatSpec, everyone said, oh, builders say they don't need specs. And I'm thinking, do they really? I hadn't had that. Now, I've only worked on large projects. I'll be quite honest, I've never done houses. Right? I've only worked on large projects, and to my knowledge, the builders always wanted a good spec. So anyway, I get all this, and everyone's saying, oh, builders hate specs, they don't want specs. So I went out, well, I didn't go out, I sent someone out and said, right, go and interview a number of builders on projects. And we did, and we've got this video which is on our website. Right? So, you know, Central Plaza, Canberra's included as a project. But this is what a builder said. Right? So Lendlease, who you may know, major developer, major builder, they actually have a huge design office internally, as well as using external designers. They're saying that a good specification means they'll make money. Essentially, it's good business to have good specification. Now, the very large guys, it's a little bit easier for them to say so. Why? Because they're really not builders anymore. They're contractors. What they do is they subcontract work out to other groups, and therefore they need control on the project as well. And it's the documentation that you provide that gives them control on projects. But I know a lot of good builders. No? So if you say, I don't know, in the residential area, someone like Mirvac, right, they want a good specification. Now, I can actually use them because we provide their specification as well. So, you know, and government in particular wants a good specification, and their builders want to know exactly what they're bidding on, because on a government project, they want to bid against the same quality as everyone else. They don't want to bid against this other builder who's prepared to cut the corner. They want a level playing field. So builders actually do want specifications. And I'll remind you that Must Builders was one of the founders of NatSpec. Do we need specs for everything? Well, I think the rule is small jobs, more spec. Okay? Some jobs, the importance of everything does not exist. You determine what you think is important. But I asked a friend, I was having coffee with friend John, and he was actually just finished doing one of those chocolate shops a few years ago. You know, those international chocolate shops, they come in. It's not bad if you're an interior designer, that's work, right? It's well paid work, by the way, as long as you're doing supervision as well. So become the project administrator, don't give it all away. And he gave me this example why he always uses an aspect specification on all of his projects. Now, what it is a renovation of a restaurant. It's a restaurant on the beaches of Sydney. It's a more upmarket restaurant, and they close down, and the owner says, right, okay, I want to reopen. There's a contract, the contract says it's going to be finished on a certain day. But the construction industry is not perfect. There's allowance for rain, there's allowance for this, that, and the other. But the client needed to know when they could reopen. So, does anyone watch MasterChef? If you, run into the larder or pantry, they grab everything out to make the dish. So they make this beautiful, beautiful chicken schnitzel, lovely, right? So, sorry, my wife's Austrian, so we eat chicken schnitzel. They got this lovely dish. Now imagine if you're the restaurant and you run into the pantry and there's no chicken. What do? You're in trouble. So high-end restaurants always try and gauge how much produce to actually have in the pantry. They need to know early that they've got a full restaurant because they need to know how many staff are going to be there. So to the client, it was really, really important to know, can we open on time? John checked with the builder. Yes, we can open on time. Absolutely fantastic. Took the bookings, open on time, lunchtime, full. Lady walks into the glass door. Oops. Problem. Gets a letter, or writes a letter, received by the client, received by John. We are suing you for $700,000 or $750,000 for damages. She had bruised her face. She was not a lawyer, she was a management consultant, charges as much. She claimed that loss of earnings because of that bruise were significant, right? And distress. I'm not saying she was drinking over lunch, or she was not drinking over lunch in order to walk into a glass door, because it actually doesn't matter. The point is, there were no markings on glass. There were no safety markings on the glass in a public restaurant. What had actually happened was, construction had occurred, opening time was getting close. There were temporary markings caught up by the specification, we believe, but the builder took them off. Either they weren't there or he took them off, right? Now, because temporary markings were caught up in the specification, John and the client were not held liable. She won 6 figures from the builder out of court. Significant, right? So, it's not just about the finished product, it is about construction as well. That's why we call it the construction specification. Okay. So, small job, possibly high expense to the architect and the client. And in this case, they were fine. But rule is small project, small specification. How to specify? Okay. You get a lot of people in the industry, especially those that have been around for a while, who hate specification writing because they didn't become designers in order to write. They want to be creative. In fact, they don't really like all their documentation. So there are architects that are very strong in different aspects of architecture. If you look at some of the major architectural firms in Australia and overseas, there are usually 2 or 3 partners that have their name there, up in lights. Let's take a 2-partner one. You will normally find that one is incredibly creative architecture architect, and the other one is a very good relationship architect. You need that because you need jobs. Right? People aren't always going to come to you because you now have a shingle that says architect. So, whilst you all will have different skills, A, to get registered as an architect, but B, to understand the documentation, you need to know there are 4 ways of putting a specification together. They're not hard. First one we all like because it's easy. Call up a product. Okay? So we call up a product, widget number 567, boom, and install it to the manufacturer's requirements. Just be a little bit careful. When you install to the manufacturer's requirements, it might mean that you've also got to use a whole series of their products. Right? So if you take something like paint, their procedure will include using their cleaner, their base coat, etc. Okay, so just be aware. It does have certain little side things to look for. But it is the easiest way for us to do. In fact, NatSpec gets supported by a number of manufacturers, and we have their specifications for free on our website. But what happens if something goes wrong? Okay. Can it go wrong? Of course it can. Here's an example. Local. New Parliament House. Can I assume you've all been there? If you haven't, please go. It's a lovely building. Right? Okay. So the 2 houses, House of Representatives and House of Senate, have fabric on the walls. The designer who wrote the specification I had lunch with yesterday, he never forgets this. You have the Bogong moth in Canberra. And the Bogong moth likes the dust mites and that are in fabric, and unfortunately got into Parliament House and it chomped away at the fabric. What happened here was it was an overseas made fabric to the overseas specification, and they didn't know about Bogong moths. Should they have? Well, the architect should have known. Right? The architect should have known that the Australian standard calls for treatment for insects. Okay, and that it includes the Bogong moth. See all the things you've got to know? Amazing, isn't it? I suppose it's a good example why architects trust NatSpec, because we track that information for you and we keep it in our documents. But in this case, chomp, 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 and yes, the architects were found liable because they should have known, and because they should have known was because it was in NatSpec. $400,000 rectification. Yes, their insurance covered it, but yes, their insurance premiums went up. And as my friend says, he never forgets the error he made. Okay. And Friday was his retirement day, so he's remembered since. So when you're using a product, a proprietary product in your specification, is it appropriate for the location, is what you've got to ask. There are temperate zones, there are tropical zones, there are cold zones. You have to say, yes, I've got a lovely product. Is it suitable for this location? The other thing you've got to think about is, can you get it in that location? So if you're designing a building in Darwin, or you're designing a building up in Cooktown, can the product get there quickly and economically? You'll have to think about that as part of your design decisions. And the other thing is, even when you've chosen a product, you will have to allow for substitutions. Because let's say it's a really common product, but everyone's ordering it. And the builder comes back and says, well, if you want that product, we're going to have to wait for 6 months. Okay? Well, 6 months. You're going to sit there for 6 months doing nothing with a holding cost and probably big projects, it could be $1 million a month in interest payment. You're not going to sit around for 6 months waiting. You will need to look and work with the builder to look for something to substitute. Okay? And it might be also that you've designed this year and it doesn't get to construction next year, when suddenly there's new products on the market and new innovations, and you need to take advantage of that. So we always have a substitution clause which allows for changes, but you have to specify who's going to be the one in charge of approving it. Okay? I'll get on to something in a second about that. Okay, but yes, you have to allow substitution. Issues about product substitution is not all products are correct. Glass falling out of high-story buildings because it's missing the compound in it that stops it from going brittle. So brittle glass falling. Talking about brittle again, electrical cable with sheathing that is brittle. In fact, I think this is going to be a really big problem, because it's about 8 years ago now, maybe 9 years ago now, it came into the market. It was sold over the shelf at the hardware store, so it was Masters that were selling it. It's a brittle cable, which means it will crack. So you've got a live electrical cable next to a flammable material, which may be insulation. If there's movement, it cracks, it has a fire. Right? So I'm kind of worried that we've potentially got a lot of fires happening in the next 5 years. Bolt at a fake, supposed to be high tensile braking. There was a little bit of overkill in the newspaper about lead in taps, but there is lead in taps. And this danger of asbestos, well, yes, it's danger. In Australia, we've got zero asbestos tolerance, right? So in building industry, you are not allowed to have a product with asbestos in it. Children's Hospital in Perth, there was one batch of panelling, and it did have asbestos in it. It actually closed down the site for quite a while because it was the union that found it. And that's a good thing that someone found it, right? But in some countries, zero asbestos actually means up to 5%. They've got a tolerance of it. In Australia, zero means zero in this particular context. Second, right, so we've gone proprietary. Second one is reference specifying. This is the easiest way of doing it. Right? Now, yes, proprietary, but reference means you're setting the level of quality through, say, an Australian standard. You're referring to quality against Australian standard. That's what NatSpec does, because we're used predominantly by government and quality projects. So a lot of NatSpec is, do it to AS 4145. Okay? So we do it that way. Australian standards is the dominant method in Australia, but Australian standards don't cover everything, so we may reference an industry organisation. And it's really important to know there are lots and lots of industry organisations in Australia on products, etc. Because at least myself, when I was studying, I would cram the night before, I would do the exam, and I would forget it the next day. So I don't actually have the ability to retain short memory, right, type of stuff. But as long as I know where I can find the information, I'm okay. Right? So it's important to know a lot of industry organisations with a lot of good information around. So we reference Australian standards, we will reference industry documents, we will reference overseas standards as well, if that's necessary. When we call up a reference standard, we will put in there that we have the right to look at the test certificate or the conformance certificate for that product. Doesn't mean we look at them all, it just gives us the right to look at them. In Australia, conformance main body to work around is JASANS, so they accredit conformance assessment bodies, and NATA, National Association of Testing Authorities, accredits laboratories. You can be a NATA accredited laboratory for this standard alone, so you've got to watch out. Someone can say, oh, we're NATA accredited, but not for the right standard, so you've got to be careful. In fact, does anyone know what these are? Other than burning buildings, anyone? No?
Very popular this year, these two examples.
Okay, well this one is La Crosse, right? La Crosse Building, Docklands, Victoria. Fire starts, it travels 13 stories in less than 20 minutes. Thankfully, no one died. Okay. This one, Grenfell Towers in the UK, June last year. In fact, I was in the UK when that happened. And unfortunately, 71 people died. Now, in both instances, the cladding contributed, or the cladding detail contributed to the spread of fire. Didn't start the fire. There were a whole lot of other issues involved, but in both cases, it is clear that the cladding the cladding system contributed to the fire. Politicians will say it was the same. They're totally different. The detail was totally different, but it scared everyone. This one worried everyone. No one died. This one scared everyone. So I sit on government committees, and I can tell you, suddenly it became the main thing, and suddenly there was this focus on non-conformity, right? So non-conformity, we're talking about products conforming, and non-compliance, we're talking about non-compliance to the National Construction Code, right? So it is a big issue with regard to substitution of products that either do not comply or do not conform. In your specification, you have the right to reject. So it becomes very important for you to document it correctly, and reference specifying is one of the cleanest ways to give you protection. An example is this one. This is one of my projects. John knows this. Before I worked in architecture, I started in engineering. Right? Okay, so the professions aren't always that friendly. So some say that I came from the dark side, others say I went to the dark side. It depends which hat you're wearing. So here's a project. I was, I think if I remember correctly, 2 years out of uni. By now, if you're observant, you would have seen that I'm Chinese. So Chinese are very lucky. I can lie about my age all the time. But the trouble is, 2 years out of uni on a building site, I still look like I was 13. So you're trying to tell people what to do, and you had to learn how to make it work for you. This particular case, I designed a building, 12,000 square metres, is equivalent to 12 floors of a multi-storey building. They brought all the pre-stressed steel. Have you done post-tension and pre-stressing? Rubber band, pull the rubber band, block it off, close it in, and the concrete's stronger. The trouble is, it's not rubber, it's made out of steel, and if it breaks, it can kill someone. Happened to a director of mine. He told me a story on his site. He wasn't there, but it happened. The cable broke when stressing, it whipped out the jack, went across the road and cut through the roof of the car across the road. Scary? Yes. Because if someone's behind it, they may not be in one piece. Walked past the steel that had been delivered on site, tons of it. For some reason, they brought it all on site in one go. It was a big site, so they could. I looked at it, and I didn't like what I saw. When steel rusts, it expands. Right? So it's iron oxide, it expands, and eventually it pops off. Right? And it leaves little craters. So if you've got a rubber band and it's got a nick in it, it will break. So I was scared that there was something wrong with this steel. I had asked for it to be to the Australian standard, and I had the right to receive the certificates. I went to the foreman and asked for the certificates. He went off to the shed, came back, and he said, couldn't find the certificates. I looked up at him and said, I'm afraid you'll have to take the steel off-site. He looked down at me and said, I'm afraid, Richard, you will have to get off-site. It's a real story, right? Sites aren't always the nicest place. They're really good, but every now and again you get a bit of friction. I stood my ground and said, no, I know my documentation. You can't show me the certification. You'll have to get it off-site. He went off to the shed, rang up my director and told the director to get me off-site. Director asked what was the issue, told him what it was. My director said, Richard says you get it off-site, you get it off-site. Lesson is, work for a good company. My director didn't come out, he trusted me. Right? We later found out that it had been brought in without certificates from Mexico. It was being used on a project, left over, dumped it into Australia. Unfortunately, it was a very reputable company that had provided this steel. The fact that they were reputable wasn't enough. They were not able to show me the certification. I was not going to allow someone to die on my site. End of story. Right? So, certification is a powerful tool for you as professionals. In fact, it's not only not having certificates, we've got issues of false certificates coming into Australia. So this is an Australian Window Association certificate here, which they say is fake. Because it's a digital world. I can download a certificate and just change what I want. So watch out for that. In fact, we created a register, that's our website, that's the box. And the whole idea of construction register is to increase the amount of trust and the amount of verification systems in Australia. We're really doing it as education. Remind people you have the right to ask for it. Okay? So it's free for designers to use. It actually was launched this month. It's been live for about 9 months. We've been testing and improving and all the rest. But it's officially launched this month, and it is being supported by government departments. Once you're a designer, if you don't find the product on that list, we recommend you tell the manufacturer, hey, why aren't you on the list? Go do it. It's not expensive. The next form, right, so we had proprietary, then reference, and now performance specifying. Performance specifying is what is the performance you want. That's why you have schedules. That's why you have the property sets that you have in schedules. Because you're saying you want, a certain amount of acoustic, a certain amount of shading, a certain amount of whatever. Right? So you say, what is the performance of the material that you want? Tolerances is the easy one. Yeah. Got tolerance, oh yeah, make it plus or minus 5 millimeters. That's great. Not always. So if I have this door and I give it a plus or minus 5 millimeter tolerance, but it's always 5 millimeters too large, it's not going to fit in the door opening, right? Because if you've said it can be 5 mils bigger than the door opening, you've got a problem. So sometimes it's 0 plus, sometimes it's 0 minus, sometimes it's plus and minus. You'll have to think about it with regard to your project, with regard to what the item actually is. And the fourth one, descriptive specifying. Who likes to write essays? Essay writers. John, you're supposed to put up your hand. No, normally it is only the lecturer, but sometimes it's not. I did have 3 people last year in one class. That was, the record. But generally we don't. We're not in this profession to write essays. And if you do write essays about your quality control, just remember my sisters and my brother. They're lawyers, they'll find gaps in it. Okay, so we tend to try and stay away from descriptive specifying. Okay, so those 4 ways of specifying are actually quite simple. It's hard though if you start from scratch. Right? So you're a brand new architect, you've now decided I'm going to open my practice, and you're actually lucky because your dad, mum or otherwise, and by the way that's not unusual, the number of architects, their first job being a family member is quite high. Right? So you're doing this. How do you start? Well, most of us nick it from someone. That's the easiest way. So you've got a friend, what are you using? You go into a new company, what are you using? And you go from there. Or you use a system like NatSpec, which does it for the industry as a whole. And by the way, each country has their own national specification system. That's just the warning. That's why we track information for you. Sorry, I tend to use these old slides because they are actually quite good, and these are all friends of mine. So Gary's retired now, but yeah, regulations changing all the time, standards are changing all the time. Are you supposed to be able to keep up to date with absolutely everything? No, it's too hard. So that's why there are national specification systems, because they've been developed by the industry of that country in order to do the tracking for the professionals. There's a good example, specifications being changed by technology. Cross-laminated timber. So cross-laminated timber, which you may be fully aware of, in Australia, it only came in 3 years ago. It had been used in Austria for many years. It only came into Australia 3 years ago. We now have 2 cross-laminated, maybe 3 cross-laminated timber factories in Australia now. Or technology. There you go. That's machines building a bridge with a 3D printer. I'm not going to walk across it yet, but they can do it now. And I've got a video which I received last week from a friend for a gallery where it's got beautiful curves over the whole gallery, and it was designed in BIM, and the BIM went straight to the cutting machines, and then they had machines putting it up, and on site there were 3 people doing this whole cladding of a great big gallery. So technology means the industry's changing. So we try and track all of those things for you. There's 20 of us. So we deal with, whether you stay in architecture or you move to landscape or interiors, or even if you do some simple work, so domestic work. We've got information for you. One thing to remember is, how do people find information? If I put taps under T, maybe everyone will find taps under T. But then my washers are under W. Now I've got my taps and my washers and they're not together. So in each of the countries there's a national classification system. In Australia it's the NatSpec classification system. It's funny, I'm a globalist, but the Australian industry wants to stick with what it's got for now. So if I look at something here that's It's an interiors one, but we've got what we call work groups, and then we divide it into little bits. Let's say the fixtures, and then we divide those into bits. So we have actually a tree system for classifying information in the building industry. You can go to our website, it's there, just download it, just use it. It's actually worth looking at it, just to see all the topics and how you will be using those topics when you become professionals. This work section structure, general products, execution, selections, is pretty international. So nearly all the countries have the same structure. But as I mentioned earlier, selections may reside on the drawings. They may reside within the specification, or you may keep them separate. That's up to you. And there is no hard and fast rule. I have never put a window schedule in the specification. Window schedules for me are on the drawing. But I've got a person in the office who says he always puts in the specification. So it's your choice. The important thing is to ensure that you've got the classification system so everyone knows where to find it. Sometimes the classification system gets a little bit confusing because you've got something that, well, I need it for this, I need it for that, and I need it for that. The rule here is put it under common requirements. Don't put it in 3 times. Why? Because we often change our mind during the design process. Or we may be influenced after it's gone out to first tender and we want to change it to either bring down the price or whatever. If you've got it in 3 times, you've got to remember to change it 3 times. Because if you don't, you're opening the door to a variation. You're opening the door to additional costs. So we create common requirements, and common requirements is where you put that type of thing. Now, there's some examples. Timber finish and treatment, put it in one place, okay? Because you may have got it for your joinery, you may have got it for your floors. Just put it in the one place, okay? Big rule. That one there, all work and materials are to comply with the BCA and all relevant Australian codes and Australian standards. Not good enough. Been thrown out of court. Why? Because within an Australian standard, there may be multiple choices. There are tables in there where you will be making a decision. Is it Class A, Class B, Class C, as an example. Right? So you actually have to make choices within the Australian standard. To industry standard, there is no industry standard. Or at least there's no way to measure industry standard. Right? So if I said, okay, write an essay to the average ability of this class in English. How good should the English be? Now, you're very good, so it's up here. But if it was my class, it would be down here. Okay, not that great at English. I'm good at Australian, but at English, I'm failed at grammar stuff. So to industry standard as appropriate really don't mean much. It's a nice touchy-feely thing. As required has a problem. As required by who? Right? As required by the builder, he doesn't require it, take it out. As required by who is a problem, so you can't just have as required. Or equal, I want this or equal. I used to write that all the time, by the way, and I'm pretty sure John would have as well. Right? Because we thought, well, we want this product all equal. It's pretty simple. Except the courts found that, well, you actually can't write that because no 2 products are equal. Right? So they said that doesn't make sense. What we actually say is, I haven't got it there, we say or approved alternative. Right? So to allow substitution or approved alternative. Never use equal. An approved alternative says that the administrator can act on behalf of the client and approve. Okay. Good specification is about your client. Good architect is about your client. Always think about your client. What does your client, can we say what does your client need as opposed to what does your client want? That's a bit of a design mix here because we often get clients that really don't know what they need. And they're asking for stuff and you know, that's why you're a professional. That's why you're giving the benefit of your experience and knowledge to get a better result for your client. But you can't start putting in things that your client is not willing to pay for. You can't start asking for a pristine industrial shed, which is going to cost 20% more when they shouldn't be paying 20% more. So you've got to think about your client. You know, anything that cannot be achieved is obvious, but people will pretend to achieve it and charge you for it. And yeah, if you can't verify it, you've got to start saying why you ask. So whether you're using NatSpec or another national system, these are the things that we have to consider when we put the information together. Summarising, it's all about quality. If you don't have a construction specification, you can't have quality. It's about, I like this one, rework. It's reducing rework. Okay. There's a document, well, I'll say it anyway. There's a document out that's actually quite old, it's about 1999 or 2003 or 2002. And it talks about the saving of over $700 million due to performance-based regulation. The sad thing is that $700+ million was because things have been done wrong, not because things have been done right. So there's a massive cost and rework to get it done properly. So you want them to do it properly in the first place, and you don't want the client having to pay for it. Caution, you've got to think about what you're doing. Even NatSpec is a template. You still make decisions. You will have to delete stuff that's not relevant. Right? And it's pretty easy sometimes. I don't have any timber, get rid of the timber section. Don't just leave it in. Sometimes it's harder. You'll have to make choices. Is it Class A, Class B, Class C? And we can't cover everything because you may decide to create something that we haven't thought about. So then you'll have to be a little bit more specific about what you want. We do try and help you though. We put guidance in our documents. For those that are pretty good with Word, there's that double dash looking thing that turns on and off, where you can see the indents and all the rest of that. Well, it actually turns on and off guidance text. So we have guidance text or hidden text in our documents to help designers make decisions. And we also provide information. A lot of our information is on our website for free. So if you want to download this report on specification writing, which covers everything I've talked about today, you go to our website, you go to the technical resources section, I hope. You will be asked to log in. So it will ask for your email address. I've been at NatSpec 13 years now. We have never used those email addresses. It's not a marketing ploy, it's a safety ploy. If we've got something wrong, we need to tell you we've got it wrong. Knock on wood, we haven't had to, but that's why it's there. We need to know that if someone's downloaded, we need to go, oh, don't do that. You know, here's the latest information. So you can download a whole load of tech notes. That one's living walls and roofs. So we've got information on design, spec writing, and on building information modelling. John, have I got time to quickly go through this? Because that was the end of the spec bit. Okay, building information modelling, everyone, well, quite a number of you nodded your heads before. You've heard about that. It is here. You get a lot of designers that say, oh, we haven't moved there. Sorry, all major project designers have moved to building information modelling. That definition, which you'll get when you get a copy of these slides, is from the European Union BIM Task Group this year. I've actually pushed for a number of organisations I'm working with to adopt that definition of BIM. Why? Because building information modelling, the word building, should be treated as a verb and not a noun. Right? It's act of building. So it doesn't matter if it's a vertical structure, which we call buildings, or horizontal structures, infrastructure, right? Or precincts, or carbon, or water, or energy. These can all be modelled, and these are all part of what we call building information modelling. Okay? It's about life cycle. So if you did a class on BIM, they should have been talking from the concept stage, construction or design, then construction, and then operation, maintenance, and then renewal. So you can use the model all the way through. I want you to remember it's the information that's important, not the model. Right? Building information modelling, it's the information that's important, because the next era of BIM is about project databases. Right? It's where you take information through the life cycle of the building, you have it there, and that information can be used by multiple people with multiple softwares for what they want to do. And that's what BIM is. It's about the built environment and information. In fact, for my sins, I work with all of those organisations on BIM. So Australasian BIM Advisory Board is a joint thing between the Australian Procurement and Construction Council, being government, and Australian Construction Industry Forum, being industry. So once again, government and industry working together. We are releasing 2 new documents this month. One's on project consistency, the other one's on asset information requirements. Building Smart is Building Smart Australasia is part of Building Smart International. They develop what's called Industry Foundation Class. We're working with the SBE NRC, which is about value add. Collaborate, which is predominantly engineers working on the base terminologies. AMCA, which is mechanical engineering and setting up a library of objects. Australian Institute of Architects. So I've been on all their steering committees and a number of others. In government, where's government? I'm sitting on the Victorian government digital strategy. We have a signatory with the China BIM Union, so it's a global thing with international standards, with Australian standards, FMA. And for my sins, I'm international president of that group as well. If you go to our website once again, you can download this information. The message is consistency, site specifications, standardising how people do things leads to productivity. Even if it's not perfect, I'm afraid. BIM is still changing, BIM is still growing. So, quite a while ago, 2011, we were asked by the federal government to create a national BIM guide. So even as, it's only a couple of years, 7 years ago, in 2011, we had in our industry confusion about what BIM should be or what it is. So we were asked by federal government to create a national BIM guide. That BIM guide discusses those issues down the side there. on the right. But effectively, it was an international issue. Our BIM guide actually came from America. It's Veteran Affairs in America. Why? They build across 50 states of America. They're a client. So the practical side of all design is about the client. So we got the permission to use their document, and then we drafted the New Zealand one, and our documentation was used to develop the South African one, and now Chile's developing all of their documentation on ours as well. What that document did was it highlighted there are 23 uses of BIM. At least that's how we're defining it. You do not have to use all BIM. In the early days, someone will come out and I say, do BIM to NatSpec. Well, you can't. You've got to choose what is going to add value. So of the 23 uses of BIM, you and the rest of the design team will make an agreement on what they want. If I look at some groups, particular clients, they're really looking for information that relates to their facilities management, their operation. So if you take health infrastructure in New South Wales, the model is there, but they want the information from the model to go into a project database. So to them, the model isn't the key. They can work with PDFs, they can work with the model. The problem with having everything in the model is the model gets too big, it's cumbersome, right? And someone's got to update it all the time. So nowadays we talk about models for purpose. There's a design model, there's a construction model, there's a facilities management model. So we have models for purpose rather than one model with everything in it. BIM Guide works with the Project BIM Brief. Project BIM Brief purely says what you want. What are the 23 things do you want? And once you've done that, you've got to create a management plan. We support Industry Foundation class. What is that? Okay, essentially, it's consistency of naming. It's so that a machine can pick up a door because it says door and not doors. Right? Because otherwise you've got a whole group of door and you've got a whole group of doors and it's getting confused. So you need to be consistent with IFC. This year we released a properties generator. It's just IFC, it's just an easy way to find it. So you click on BIM and it will give you all the things you need. And in fact, Building Smart International asked us to present on this last week, and I had the Swiss people come and visit us to work with us on this as well last week. But door, and it'll come down with all your definitions, and you can choose which source. Have you heard of COBie? Don't worry, I don't use COBie. But these sources, property categories, all the rest of it, it's about consistency. So if you are going to make a BIM object, you can download the property sets from here and shove it in your object and be consistent. That's what it really is. Okay. The detail's the detail. I don't get it. I come from drawing board day. I never even used CAD. So. As far as what I was saying before, you know, we as designers, you know, we all specialise in different ways. The Open BIM Object Standard is about how should all your objects be made. We developed this with New Zealand. It has had interest from another 3 countries already, and we haven't released it yet. It will be released this month. It's actually at the graphics stage. So there's an Open BIM Object Standard which works around IFCs. We are working, and this is important for you because you will do work for different governments. As I said before, a lot of you will work nationally and internationally. We are getting all the different governments in Australia to start asking for the same thing. Currently, they all ask for something different when it comes to BIM. we've had agreement from them. We will work to, coordinate and collaborate to get one framework. And there is this Australasian BIM Advisory Board, which one. The documents is a nice little hierarchy. So you start with what is BIM. You then move to what does the client really need? What's their systems? Then, okay, what information is required to work with their systems? Then you start moving up the chain. And they're the BIM documents used in Australia across, or should be across all projects from now on. As I said, that one's only being released this month. That one's released, but the standard around that's only being released this month. So, we're in development. We're in development. That's it. Okay, documentation. It all works together, whether it's on the drawing board, whether it's CAD, whether it's BIM. Your documentation includes your contract, your specifications as well. Thank you. Oh, I've got scale rulers for you too. So there's 2 each. There's 2. Because someone always nicks one, I've always found.
Are there any questions for Richard? Apart from, can I have a scale ruler?
Question?
I'll turn down the aircon.
Yeah, quick question. Sorry, you said something which I missed when I was writing something else down.
I never remember what I say.
I think I remember. You said instead of saying or equal, you should now say
or approved alternative.
Approved.
Or approved alternative. So that is what we're encouraging everyone to use nowadays.
What about or similar approved?
No. Because similar doesn't mean anything.
Okay.
You have to say who is approved by.
Yeah, in your documentation you will somewhere, and look, if it's not there, it always comes back to the project administrator. Right, so the project administrator works on behalf of the client, it's the client that's paying. So, the default is the project administrator.
Any other questions? Have any of you written the specification?
Yes.
So, which of the 4 systems are you using? Because I think I'm doing a lot of descriptive specification because just because that's the base that I started with smatterings of proprietary. So I use the stuff that the material from the suppliers to beef up my descriptive things, because the descriptors are really contextualizing within the project.
Just remember my family.
Yes.
We discourage descriptive.
And what about performance? I mean, I think for me the problem with performance specification is that not everyone understands it, and people tend to do the wrong thing because they kind of have an understanding of performance that's not standard.
Yeah, look, a specification actually will include all those 4, or at least 3 of the 4. Right? It's never going to be one or the other. So you look at something and say, well, what's the best way to describe this? So if I take a window schedule, now, if I'm working for a private client, I can quite happily say I want this window and this is a proprietary and it's got the number and all the rest. If I'm working for a government client, I'm not allowed to use proprietary. Government clients will not allow architects to use proprietary because the manufacturers have claimed it restricts competition. Because even if you do have a substitution clause, they're saying, hold on, you've put Dulux paint there. That means they're the ones you're going to go to first, rather than putting it out to the industry, and then 4 paint companies can come in with a price or whatever. So government projects become a little bit more complicated because we do our research. We know which product we want, we're not allowed to put it in there. So it's going to be a mixture. If I take a window, when you really think about it, I have window properties that I want. Right? So I want my reflectivity to be something, I may want my solar heat gain coefficient to be something, I may want my colour to be something, and I can actually schedule those properties. If I chose a product that suited those properties, it would never suit it exactly. It would, and I haven't got it here, but essentially I have 3 properties. Let's say 1.0 is exactly what I want. So the first property is 1.0, second property, oh, it's even better, I've got 1.2, third property, yeah, it's not bad, 1.1. But I only need 1.1. Another competitor comes in and they've got 1.1. Now, if you're using purely the product, that one's less than the product that you've chosen. And yet it's actually satisfying your design requirement. So these are some of the arguments of manufacturers as to why proprietary should not be used on government projects. From a designer's perspective, I use that product because I've used it 5 times and it's worked 5 times. I actually want to use that product. I trust that product. So when I'm working for a private client, I will call up that product. And that's life. I'd rather work with a product I know than something that may not work or may not turn up or may have greater variation to its manufacturing. So, proprietary, personally, like it. Government work, not allowed to use it.
All right, I think we better move on. So let's thank Richard again for his input.
That's right.
Yeah, it's great. Now let me just stop the recording, and then we can yes, you can go ahead and stop.